Welcome back, everyone.
Episode 28, Impatience.
So the episode picks up right where we left off last time, with Light, or L, speaking to Nier, or N, for the first time. And as we kind of established in the previous video, this conversation has Light feeling like he's seen, or I guess heard, a ghost, because his first line in this episode is,
N, why do I feel like I'm talking to L?
And this kind of affirms what I mentioned at the beginning of the last video, how, in a lot of ways, L and Nier are very similar. Because when Light heard Mello on the phone for the first time, the thought of L didn't even cross his mind. And yet here, he's feeling like he's literally talking to the man himself. But anyway, Nier goes on to kinda talk a little shit.
The FBI and the CIA have explicitly asked that I head up their investigation, not you.
Which just sounds very childish, but honestly, I'm okay with that. Because, I mean, he is a child. Like, he's only 17 at this point. And furthermore, to be clear, he doesn't respect the new L. And I mean, why would he? Like, old Larry Connors made it pretty clear in the previous episode that this L and his Killa task force have failed to really do anything in the 5 years since the real L died. Like, when you compare what the OG L did to what the new L has done, I mean, it's like night and day. I mean, we dedicated half of episode 26 to showing us exactly what the original L uncovered during the year that he worked on this investigation. Meanwhile, we know for a fact that the current L hasn't done shit in the last 5 years because, I mean, how could he? He's Killa. Like, in what world is Light ever going to intentionally put himself in a situation where the task force is going to find actual evidence on him or Misa? And it's not even like he can go about framing someone else, because what would be the point? I mean, it would make sense if he intended on stopping, because then he could just put the blame on someone else and have them be executed in his stead. But he has no intention of ever stopping, so that's not even really an option, you know? So yeah, the new L has practically done nothing in the last 5 years, whereas Nier has managed to uncover basically everything on his own without all of the resources that the original L had. So I could completely understand how we might look at this new L as being incompetent as fuck. And also, while we're on the topic of Light being L, I mean, that's part of the reason I said back in episode 26 that it was probably the worst thing he could have done, because by being L, he's put a target on himself. Like, I'm not saying that he intentionally did it. I mean, he didn't know that L had set up an automated transmission to be sent to his secret proteges in the event of his death. I mean, how could anyone have seen that coming? But still, it doesn't change the fact that taking this position was a mistake on his part. Like, look, once L was gone, what he should have done was kill the entire task force. And don't get me wrong, I get why he didn't. No one's out here trying to commit patricide if they don't have to, but that would have been the smartest thing to do, because no one knew about Light and his ties to the Killa investigation. Like, he killed everyone outside of the task force who knew about him or Misa being involved. So, if he had just added the members of the task force to his hit list and just let L go silent, or even better, use the death note to have various criminals around the world write L is dead before dying, which should work. I mean, I know back in episode 4 he tried to have one write,
I know that L is suspicious of the Japanese police.
And that didn't work, but the whole reason behind that is because they couldn't write something that they didn't know. However, I feel like L is dead should work, because they're not stating that they know that L is dead, they're just writing something that says that he's dead. Which, yes, semantics, whatever, but if you can make someone write out an intricate suicide note that includes a hidden message that says, L, do you know? Then I feel like you could have someone write L is dead. But whatever, even if that didn't work, when L inevitably goes dark and stops responding to people, rumors will begin circulating, and eventually the ICPO will find out about it, and that will cause panic. Because if Killa can get to a guy who's never revealed his name or shown his face, as far as they know, then what luck does anyone else have against them? And hell, at this point in the story, it's been established that no one else is even really looking into Killa besides L. Like, if Light had killed the rest of the task force, then they wouldn't have been able to convince the NPA to reopen the case into Killa. Essentially, the case, along with everyone else, would be dead. And hell, what's even better is, even if the NPA or ICPO wanted to continue the investigation by trying to reach out to Eraldo Coyle or Denev, they also wouldn't respond, which could make them assume that all three of the world's best detectives had been killed by Kira. And even taking Nier and Mello into account, in 2007, they're 13 and 14 years old, respectively. So no one would take them seriously if either one of them tried to pass themselves off as the new L. And even if they did try to come back around in 2012, they really wouldn't be able to do anything. Like, Mello kidnapping the director of the NPA doesn't mean shit, because the names Takemura would have given him would have been of people who had already died. Furthermore, I don't really see Nier getting as far as the meeting with the President of the United States, because that meeting was predicated on the fact that L did exist and was actively trying to get to Kira. But in the scenario that I'm talking about, everyone would know that L is dead years prior to this meeting. Meaning, who's to say the President wouldn't have already submitted to Kira like the various other nations did? And if you think that's a stretch, well, we'll get to it. Anyway, all of that to say, taking on the role of L was just not a great idea on his part, because now he's put himself in the line of fire once again. Not to say that Nier has any idea that he's Kira, but Light's still in a situation now where he's in direct contact with someone who is a threat to him. And, you know, to be honest, that might have been by design, because a common theory I've seen in circulation is that Ryuzaki actually set it up to play out like this. That he correctly assumed that Light would go on to take over for him as L, which, when you think about it, isn't really all that much of a stretch, you know? Like, of all the members on the task force, there was really only one person who could effectively take over for him. And so, because Ryuzaki assumed that that would happen, he made it so that Roger, or really Nier and Mello, would be informed of his passing so that they'd know to be weary or suspicious of whoever took over for him. Again, they have no idea that the new L is Kira, but because Kira is L, it's now forced him to be in contact with Nier, and to a lesser extent, Mello, thus leaving the opportunity open for him to make some sort of mistake that'll make them look at him as a suspect. And I mean, it's a little convoluted, and there's nothing in the show that outright points to that being what Ryuzaki had planned, but it does make sense as a theory. And yeah, all of that to say, Light should have killed the remaining members of the task force and just went about the rest of his normal life as a police officer or whatever, while being Kira in secret. And again, I get why he didn't, both because he didn't want to just kill his dad and also because he wanted the access and clout that came from being L. But nevertheless, it was a bit of a fuck up on his part. And wow, that was a longer section than I thought it'd be. We're only 2 sentences into this episode at this point, so let's just jump back into it.
After reviewing the information, I believe there's a possibility that solving this case could lead to the arrest of Kira. As such, I'm willing to lend you my full support.
So Nier's pretty cocky, in my opinion. Well, I guess it's not just my opinion, as Light goes on to say.
Who is he anyway? This confidence.
And I like this scene because it's interesting seeing how Light's reacting to this conversation. Because for him, this has gotta be hella disorienting. Like, this N person thinks that this situation will lead to the arrest of Kira. And from Light's perspective, it's like, why? How? Like, you have to keep in mind that Light killing Takemura wasn't supposed to be seen as Kira killing Takemura. It was originally meant to be perceived as the kidnappers having killed him. And yet N seems to have deduced that perhaps Takemura was killed by Kira, and that he also believes that this whole situation will eventually lead directly to Kira. So the idea of suddenly finding out that there's someone out there with both the skills and the resources to actually be somewhat of a threat is alarming, especially when you consider the fact that he's finding this out in the midst of dealing with a situation that involves his sister being kidnapped and the death note possibly falling into the hands of criminals. Like, this has been a crazy couple of days for him, which is why Light ends up kind of stuttering a little bit when Nier asks,
"Is there a problem, L?"
No.
But anyway, Light goes on to explain the situation to Nier, informing him of the chief's daughter being kidnapped and that those responsible want the notebook in exchange for her. Nier then goes on to kinda take things over by saying that he'll have agents on standby in LA and that he'll also monitor the situation via their satellite. However, almost immediately after saying that, he decides to take things in a different direction, as he says,
"On second thought, I'll let you have full authority on this, L.
before he then promptly hangs up the phone. And that was an interesting choice, because as we've established, Nier thinks that the new L is incompetent, and yet he's decided to let him handle the situation himself. And while the members of the NPA's task force are glad that they'll be able to run the show,
That's good. It means we're taking the lead.
Nier's team isn't quite as thrilled by the idea.
Is it really safe to leave this case in the hands of a fake L? He hasn't had any success in catching Kira so far.
And I can see where Rester is coming from, but Nier's reasoning behind doing this was actually pretty smart, as he goes on to say,
It means there'll be an opportunity to take advantage of him.
and that's actually kind of brilliant. In theory, anyway, because you gotta take a look at the whole situation. Right now, the SPK is basically working under the same assumption as Mello, in the sense that they believe that there are two notebooks out there.
One of them is in Kira's possession, the other's with the NPA.
So, getting Kira's notebook is basically a non-starter. Like, they have no way of figuring out who or where he is at this point. So, that's not even really a factor. However, the notebook that belongs to the NPA is a completely different story. Especially right now. I mean, given the fact that the acting director of the NPA just had his daughter get kidnapped, it's looking like it's very likely that they're going to actually do an exchange. And by being kept in the loop, the SPK can make their move and retrieve the notebook while this exchange is going down. Especially if their agents are going to be in LA working alongside the NPA. It gives them ample opportunity to just take that shit. Furthermore, even if they couldn't get it during the exchange, for whatever reason, they still have a better chance of taking it from whoever the kidnappers are than they would be trying to take it from the National Police Agency of Japan. Like, trying to steal it directly from the NPA would be, I imagine, an international incident, whereas stealing it from criminals would be justice or whatever. So yeah, it's actually really smart to let L handle this, because with his track record, something is bound to go wrong. And when it does, they'll theoretically swoop in and take it. Now, that being said, it could be dangerous to let a weapon of mass destruction into the hands of whoever's trying to get the notebook, but Nier's honestly not too concerned with that, as he goes on to say,
Of course, saving people's lives is important, but as the SPK, our primary goal is very clear. We'll work to get the notebook and capture Kira once and for all.
And I mean, he's not technically wrong. Like, this is honestly the most logical and practical way to go about it. Like, yeah, people will probably die during or after this exchange, but I mean, as long as they accomplish their goal in the long run, then it is what it is. And this is also very much like L, seeing as he was more than willing to let those businessmen die back in episode 20 to prove that one of the Yotsuba members was actually Kira. But the thing about this situation is, well, we'll get to it a little later. Anyway, from there, we move back to the task force, where the chief is, well, he's just not in a good place. And, I mean, understandably so. Like, you really can't help but feel for this guy, you know? Like, to have not one, but both of his children wrapped up in this investigation is crazy. And the fact that it's happening to a dude who's already had a heart attack brought on by stress, it's just, man, it's rough. But anyway, as the group is planning out their next moves, we see him approach Light and say,
I don't care if it costs me my life. Please, just save Sayu. Promise me.
And I'm not even gonna lie, this shit had me a little choked up. Like, the fact that the chief is coming to Light and asking him this, well, it says a lot. And I say that because of who the chief is, because of the type of man that we know him to be. Like, remember that scene from episode 23? The one where Light asked the chief if he was ready for Higuchi, and he responded by saying,
I don't need my son asking if I'm ready. Of course I am.
Like, when he asked Light to do this, my mind immediately went back to that scene, because it served to really kind of put things in perspective regarding how desperate the chief must feel right now. Like, this is a guy with a strong sense of hierarchy. And what I mean by that is that he's a traditional kind of man. Like, he feels an overwhelming sense of responsibility in regard to his subordinates, to his wife, and to his children. Like, for example, the chief would never have given any of his men up if he had been taken like Takemura. He'd have let them kill him before he ever gave them anything. That's just the type of guy that he is. But this situation has him all out of whack, and he knows that he could very well end up dying if things don't go like they're supposed to. So now, in this moment of desperation, situation, he finds himself turning to his son for help, begging him to help him save Sayu. Like, I have to imagine that that wasn't an easy thing for him to do at all. But I appreciate the fact that it was included. It really says a lot about him, and really, it says a lot about Light, too. Because the chief trusts his son to take care of their family in his absence, because he believes that he's raised him to be, an honorable man. But yeah, in response, Light actually gets upset, as he says,
Stop talking like that, Dad.
Before going on to scold him for even thinking about giving up. He then tells him that he'd never forgive him if he let himself die in front of Sayu, ending things by saying,
I want you to do whatever's necessary to make sure both you and Sayu get out of this alive. Promise me, Dad.
And I 100% believe that this is legit. And I know that might sound surprising coming from me, but I do not think that this is an act. Like, watching Light's response here made me think about his reaction to his father saying that he might be killed by Kira back in episode 5, and how Sachiko and Sayu both begged him to leave the investigation, while Light just responded by saying how proud of him he was, while adding,
If anything should ever happen to you, I'm going to find Kira and make sure he gets executed.
Like, that is Light when he's acting. Calm, calculated, perfect answers to everything. It's like I said during the video for episode 25, when Light was talking to Elle on the rooftop, spouting all those rehearsed sounding answers. But that's not what he's doing here. He could have gone that route. He could have responded by saying that he'll save her no matter what happens. It wouldn't have even looked suspicious, honestly, seeing as he's reacted like that in the past. But this?
I'd never be able to forgive you if you ended up dying in front of Sayu.
Nah, that feels raw. That feels real. This dude doesn't want his dad or his sister to die. Hell, as far as his sister goes, we saw proof of him trying to avoid killing her in the last episode. Like, Light is a piece of shit. I stand by that. But he's not a complete sociopath. He cares about certain people. I'd argue 3 people, and 2 of those 3 people are on the chopping block right now. Now, that being said, will he kill either of them if it came down to it? Well, according to him, he would. I mean, we saw him admit to something like that back in episode 2.
I don't want to think about it, but if I make one mistake, I might end up killing my own family.
So we know that he's always considered the fact that killing one or all of them would be a possibility if he continued going down this path. I guess now we'll just have to see if, when it really comes down to it, he's actually willing to do it. Anyway, from there we switch scenes and head to a different area of Light's apartment, as he informs Misa that she'll be accompanying him on his trip to LA. Mostly because
there's a chance I might need to use your eyes this time, so I want to have you close by.
And Misa is ecstatic about it.
No, Light! You're the best!
But yeah, while Misa starts packing, we see Light walk into the restroom and run the water in the sink, and as he stares at his own reflection, we hear him say,
If things go badly, I may have to kill Sayu.
And this scene really stood out to me for 2 reasons. The first is because it actually kinda parallels the scene from the episode of Code Geass that I'm currently working on, with Lelouch staring at himself in the mirror. And it's interesting because, and I guess spoilers for Code Geass if you're watching that series, but it's interesting because they're on opposite sides of the same issue, kind of. Like, Light is struggling with the idea that he might have to kill his sibling, whereas Lelouch was dealing with the aftermath of killing his own. I just thought that that was really interesting, especially given the fact that I'm working on both of these episodes at the same time. But the other and more pertinent reason this stands out is because it really does serve to humanize him. Like, this decision is weighing on him. How, like I said in the last video, he needs to determine what's more important, holding on to the death note or saving his little sister. And I actually really like seeing this side of him. Seeing him put in a position where it's not necessarily his ass that's on the line. Like, every time he's been put in a compromising position, it's always been life or death for him specifically. But that's not what's happening here. Like, honestly, he's not in any danger himself. I mean, the kidnappers getting the notebook doesn't necessarily mean that his life's at risk, and killing Sayu in order to keep them from getting the notebook also isn't a threat to his life. This is really one of the first times where Light is in a situation that is life or death, where his life isn't actually on the line. And it's interesting watching him grapple with it all. What's also interesting is that when he says this, we see Misa on the other side of the door listening in. And man, what I would give to know exactly what she's thinking right now. Because, like, we saw her in the previous episode. She was so excited to see Sayu. I mean, she's known Sayu since she was a kid. Like, I imagine that they've become, like, sisters over the years. So to hear him say that he might kill her, I don't even... Like, damn, I really want to know what she thinks about that and how she'd feel about it if he did actually do it. Because I genuinely do not know. The only thing that I really know for sure is that she's claimed that she would stand by Light no matter what he did. But does that extend to him killing his own sister? I don't know, man. What do y'all think? How do you think she would react to him deciding to do that? Let me know in the comments, because I'm actually genuinely curious. But anyway, moving on. We transition to the following day as Misa, who I gotta say has an awesome sense of style, is walking alongside Light through the airport as a voiceover from Light lets us know what the plan is. With Light and Misa heading out to LA first in order to get things set up, followed by the others heading that way too, each on separate flights as to avoid any sort of suspicion. However, when it comes to Aizawa, he'll stick with the chief to keep an eye on him. And in order to avoid being recognized, he decides to get a haircut. And not gonna lie, I dig it. But yeah, one more thing I'll point out is the fact that on the flight, we see Misa snuggling up to Light. And man, they'd be so cute if I just didn't know that he just does not like her. But anyway, this is where things get intense, because while the chief is making his way to his flight, he's approached by this dude.
Mr. Yagami, who are you? One of the kidnappers.
And from there, this guy tells the chief that he'll be taking a different flight from the one he planned on boarding. And Aizawa, while speaking to Light, asks if he should move in and arrest the guy. But Light rightfully calls him out for not thinking things through. Like, it would make absolutely zero sense to try and move in to arrest this guy, since Sayu is clearly in Los Angeles, so arresting someone here in Japan wouldn't do y'all any good. I mean, think, Aizawa, think. Anyway, Aizawa follows them and relays the fact that the flight they seem to be getting on is one that is also heading towards Los Angeles. And this gets Light a little worried, as he thinks,
Could they have somehow arranged for another plane? Oh, this is bad.
Oh, you have no idea. Because, if I'm being completely honest, the rest of this episode is actually just fucking bonkers. Starting with the fact that after getting on this other flight, this happens.
Flight SC-333, do you copy? You have strayed from your flight path.
So yeah, they've just hijacked this plane. And let me say it one more time. They have hijacked a plane. Or, well, according to this dude...
This is not a hijacking. We're simply making a detour.
Which... What? But you know what? The thing is, this motherfucker is so calm and sounds so sure that I had to actually look up what the definition of hijacking is, because he had me doubting whether or not what he was doing was actually hijacking. And to be clear, the definition of hijacking is to unlawfully seize an aircraft, ship, or vehicle in transit and force it to go to a different destination or use it for one's own purposes. So what you're doing is the textbook definition of the word, my guy. Like, get the fuck out of here. Or, wait, no, like, actually come back and go where you're actually supposed to. Like, this is nuts, because this is an actual pilot. Like, once Light and the others become aware of the situation, they look the pilot up and see his credentials, and he's completely legit. And Light even goes on to say,
the pilot's a veteran of over 15 years.
So this just seems so ridiculous, because what's this guy gonna do after this? This man has knocked out his co-pilot and has, by any definition of the word, hijacked this plane. Like, you're going to jail, bro. Like, you're going to jail for the rest of your life. And I just want to know, how did they convince you to do this, man? What do they have on you? Because it's gotta be something big if you also follow it up by saying that if anyone tries to interfere, you'll
crash the plane and take all the passengers with me.
So, yeah. Anyway, news of the situation spreads like a wildfire because you can literally see them talking about it on the news. Like, this is such a crazy situation. But I also want to point out this line from Matsuda.
This is bad, Light. I mean L.
So I like that he tripped up and called him Light. It's very in character for Matsuda, especially since he probably doesn't usually have to refer to Light as L in normal situations. But anyway, Light's panicking, and rightfully so, because the more out of hand this all gets, the more likely it is that he may have to follow through with the one thing he doesn't want to do. But more on that in a minute. For now, he's got no choice but to go running to Nier for help, as he reaches out and tells him to make sure that no one interferes with what's going on. Which, I mean, that's not even really an unreasonable request, seeing as the pilot has threatened to crash the plane if anyone interferes. And yet, old Rester over there ends up saying,
"What's he thinking? I never realized he was this unreliable."
I mean, there's a lot of shit you can say about the new L, but this situation is unprecedented. Like, I don't even know if the original L could have foreseen some shit like this. Like, this group who kidnapped 2 unsuspecting people apparently also have the ability to influence a dude with 15 years tenure to commit a crime with a punishment that at minimum will have him in jail for the rest of his life, and at maximum will end with him being fucking executed. Like, the idea of a notebook that kills people seems more feasible than whatever the hell is going on here. Because seriously, what the fuck do they have on you, bro? But anyway, Nier goes on to agree to help them out. And I swear, I couldn't stop laughing when he said,
"If there's anything else we can do, don't hesitate to let us know."
Because he sounds like a fucking flight attendant. But anyway, back on the plane, we see this dude hand the chief a listening device, and on the other line is Mello. And from the jump, he makes it clear that he does not care about Sayu's life, nor does he care about the chief's life.
There's only one thing I want, and you know what that is.
What he wants is obviously the notebook, and if he gets that, he swears that no harm will befall Sayu, the chief, or any of the people on this plane. And yeah, seems simple enough. Well, in theory, anyway. In reality, the chief is a fucking wreck. Because this paragon of justice and honor and duty, this good man is at odds with himself because he understands the gravity of this situation. Like, it's such an ethical quagmire in the sense that he has to weigh his options as both the acting director of the NPA and the father of his daughter. Like, honestly, if this was anyone else's kid, he wouldn't be doing this. Like, from a purely objective standpoint, this trade makes absolutely no sense. One person for a weapon that can, and very likely will, be used to kill so many people. I mean, shit, his actions here could essentially lead to the creation of another Gita. Like, this trade is nonsensical. And yet, from a subjective standpoint, I personally don't know anyone that wouldn't make this trade for their child. My parents would do it for me, my wife's parents for her, and I know without a doubt that both me and my wife would do anything for our little girl. So yeah, I cannot blame him for this decision at all. But you better fucking believe that he's gonna blame himself if they get their hands on this thing. And yeah, while he contemplates the situation and the choice he'll ultimately have to make, let's take a second to head back to how to use it. First up, if you have traded the eye power of a god of death, you will see a person's primary lifespan in the human world. And, I mean, not much to really say about that. We learned about it initially in episode 3 and saw it play out through Misa's eyes on multiple occasions throughout the series. So, yeah. Next up, the names you see with the eye power of a god of death are the names needed to kill that person. You will be able to see the names even if that person isn't registered in the family registration. And okay, so that's interesting because, like, what happens if you change your name? Like, for example, if you get married, like, does the new name you register as have to be the name that's used in the death note? Like, if Light and Misa got married, would he have to write down Misa Yagami? Or, like, we know that aliases don't affect anything, seeing as Weddy and Ivor had to have their actual names written down in order to be killed. So, yeah, like, how does that work? Is it that the moment you register it as something else with your with your local government, it suddenly updates for all Shinigami? That sounds absurd. You know what? I'm not going to think about this one too much because it's a little funky. So, yeah. Anyway, we get back from the break and we find that the pilot has landed the plane in the middle of the desert, which where the fuck even is this? Like, seriously, most of the flight between Japan and Los Angeles would have you flying over the Pacific Ocean. So, like, how'd they get to this desert-looking area? Like, is this somewhere in California? I mean, I guess that would make the most sense, seeing as California is about 40% desert, but it just seems crazy that he was able to land here without any problems. Also, can planes this big just land in areas like this and then just take back off? Like, this terrain looks so uneven. I can't help but think all of these rocks and bushes would just tear those wheels to shreds.
To shreds, you say?
But anyway, the chief gets out and just wanders around the desert, while Nier, the SBK, and L tune in. And I want to point out this line from Light.
Dad.
And I know, it's one word, but I point this out to kind of bolster the argument that Light does care about what happens to his father. However, Ryuk, not so much.
So what's gonna happen?
This dude is just here for a good time, man. Anyway, suddenly, in the middle of the fucking desert, a hatch just opens up out of the ground. And if you're thinking,
What?
Well, you wouldn't be alone because,
What?
Like, just how? What is this place? Like, seriously, where the fuck are we? Like, this is so crazy because at some point we see these guys' hideout and it's just an abandoned building. But apparently they have access to something like this, a whole ass underground facility of some kind. Like, this just seems so silly. And I swear, our two new leads are just equally unserious about this situation.
You see the entrance, don't you, Yagami? Go inside.
Well, isn't that interesting?
Meanwhile, Light's just freaking out, which makes sense. This situation is so crazy and the stakes are so high because, again, he's got three of the things he cares about more than anything on the line right now. His father, his sister, and the Death Note. It's a lot. But anyway, from there we go ahead and discover what's waiting for the chief underground. And, well, spoiler alert, it's nothing good. Well, damn, bro. I mean, I get you want to send a message, but shit. Just laying on the trauma for this poor young girl. R.I.P. to Sayu's mental health. Like, damn.
The glass is bulletproof, understand?
Yeah, no, I kind of picked up on that. And I mean, one bullet would have probably sufficed as an explanation. But I guess, thanks for being thorough? Anyway, this dude goes on to explain that this place used to belong to a crime syndicate, which, okay, I can kind of vibe with that. But then, at the same time, given I know what else is hidden in here, I'm just like, what kind of crime syndicate are y'all talking about? Because this place is set up more like a military installation. And you'll understand why I'm saying that in just a minute. But anyway, the kidnapper goes on to explain how the trade will work, saying that the chief will slide the notebook through the glass door, and then the kidnapper will unlock it, causing it to spin just enough so that the notebook will end up on his side, and Sayu will end up with the chief. It's actually very fair. The kidnappers don't get what they want until they actually let Sayu go. So that's something, I guess. Now, while that's going on, we transition back to Light and Nier. And Nier, this man is such a troll because he says,
You can't seriously think that handing the notebook over to someone you don't know is a good idea, can you?
And I can't lie, the voice actor for Nier, Kathy Westluck, is doing a phenomenal job at making this kid seem like a total asshole. Like, I find it hilarious, but if he was talking to me like that, I'd be fucking pissed. Like, no shit, I don't want to give the notebook up, but it's not really my choice right now, is it? I am just a detective. This is the acting director of the NPA. Like, eat shit, kid. And also, kinda fuck him for saying this at all, because he had old Larry Connor stroll into the NPA headquarters and ask them to hand over the notebook. And it's not like they knew him. But anyway, with Nier only serving to stoke the flames of Light's frustration, we see him getting stressed. Very stressed. Like a level of stress we haven't seen since probably the end of episode 9. Yeah, when he was going off in his room after Elle caught him off guard at his entrance ceremony, and where then he took his frustration out on Ryuk. This time, unfortunately, Misa's the one catching them strays, because when she asks him if something's wrong, this happens.
Is something wrong?
Misa, just shut up and do what I told you, alright?
Yikes. I mean, I get that he's stressed, I totally understand that, but I can't help but feel for Misa on that one. It's even worse because you can kinda hear her whimper a little after he says it. Like, that legitimately scared her, and I could understand why. Like, Light's been coasting for years, never having a reason to really get this worked up. But now she's seeing what this dude's like when he's under serious pressure. Hell, even Ryuk was caught off guard by him when he did it back in episode 9. But anyway, Light goes on to explain that he needs Misa to continue killing criminals because any change in their schedule would not be great, given the fact that they now know that this N person is looking into Kira. And given how confident N is, plus the resources he seems to have at his disposal, there's no way that they can deviate from their regularly scheduled killings, lest they want to bring suspicion to themselves. It's actually something that Light touched on back in episode 8, when he was writing a bunch of names down in advance in case something happened to him that prevented him from acting as Kira. But anyway, Misa agrees, but I guess her curiosity kind of gets the better of her, because she goes on to ask who this in-person is. And, well...
But who is this guy?
Just get on with it, alright?
And I gotta give props to Brad Swale, because he's doing a great job at coming off super aggressive here. Like, damn, I feel Light's anger and frustration with the way he's delivering these lines, and I want to give him credit for it. Now, after Light's verbal onslaught, which has Misa damn near cowering in fear, Ryuk actually chimes in and kinda calls him out for it.
Taking out your anger on her, huh?
And Light doesn't end up responding, but I just thought it was worth pointing out that Ryuk said that. I don't think he's trying to defend Misa or anything, but more so just commenting on the fact that Light's taking his shit out on her. But anyway, after that, we see Misa staring at Light as he fiddles with his watch. And while I'm pretty sure that she doesn't know what he's doing, we, as the audience, do. And it's now that we get down to the wire, as Light must decide whether or not he's going to choose Sayu or the notebook. And it's interesting because it didn't really occur to me until right now, but there's a distinct parallel between Light and the Chief right now, with both of them choosing between Sayu and the Death Note, albeit in very different ways. But yeah, that's probably an obvious parallel that I'm only just now realizing. The Chief has been struggling with whether or not to give up the notebook to save Sayu, whereas Light is struggling with whether or not to kill Sayu in order to hold on to the notebook. But anyway, from there we're privy to Light's thoughts as he thinks,
I can still make it, but is my only option to kill Sayu?
And I know I said this earlier, but I really like seeing him struggle with this because I feel like it's the most human we've seen him be in such a long time. Like, killing people has always been such a nonchalant thing for him. Hell, either nonchalant or just outright enjoyable. So to see him struggle with this, to hesitate on pulling the trigger, it's such a nice change of pace. I like seeing this internal struggle as he's forced to pick between his ambition and one of the few people that he actually loves. And it feels especially poignant because, like I had mentioned earlier, he had already seemed to harden himself to the idea of having to do this exact thing back when he was still in high school. And yet, now that the moment is here, he's realizing just how difficult it's going to be. But anyway, for now we'll leave Light to mull over his choices as we head back to these three underground.
I'll test the notebook.
Test it! You're gonna kill someone? No, I can't allow that.
Okay, so I get where the Chief is coming from. It's probably like an automatic response thing to the idea of willfully letting someone commit murder. But like, dude, stop. What do you think they're gonna do with this thing once you hand it over? Use it as a fucking diary? Come on, man. This is just one death of many. And furthermore, as this dude points out,
we can't make the trade without making sure it's the real thing.
So yeah, this has to happen. Because for all they know, you guys might have created an exact copy of the notebook in a single night. But anyway, the situation is tense as the kidnapper threatens to shoot Sayu if the chief resists, which then transitions to a shot of Light's hand still hovering above the scrap of the notebook, then to Sayu cowering in fear, then to the chief thinking about what the right thing is to do. Like, the tension here isn't just palpable, it is suffocating, because this whole thing is the definition of a no-win situation. No matter what Light or the chief does here, they're going to lose. It's just a matter of how much. But yeah, ultimately, both Light and the chief concede, as the chief lets the kidnapper use the notebook, and Light convinces himself that he can't kill Sayu, given the fact that no one knows about her kidnapping outside of the two task forces. And I find Light's situation interesting because, I mean, he had to have known that killing her was never an option, right? Like, from the moment he said that Kira might have killed Takemura, he made it so that it would be impossible to outright kill her. Because if he did kill her, then there would only be a handful of people that would have even known about the situation. Like, don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed watching him grapple with this whole thing throughout this episode, but when you really think about it, he was never gonna kill her because it would ultimately serve to make him a primary suspect again. So, yeah. Anyway, like I said a second ago, the chief lets the kidnapper use the notebook, and, well...
That's what you get when you steal from me and sell goods behind my back. He was a worthless idiot. This is the first time he's been useful.
Damn, Rod is, no joke, because that was straight savage. Also, I love Mello's reaction here. He's like, well, that ain't got shit to do with me, so... But yeah, after that, the kidnapper and the chief finalize their exchange, and when we switch back to Light, we see him watching the chief and Sayu escape the underground facility together.
Dad, Sayu.
And y'all, the fucking relief in his voice. Like, you can't tell me that he doesn't genuinely love them. But yeah, from there we switch back to the SPK where, via their satellite, they can see the dude with the notebook walking towards a helicopter that's just out there waiting for him. And okay, whatever, you know, that's fine. If nothing else, it means it'll be easy to track him, especially given the fact that they have a satellite. Except, actually...
A missile?
So, do y'all remember the beginning of this show? About a kid who just so happens to stumble across a magical notebook, how he finds out what it can do and thinks to himself that he'll make the world a better place? Remember how simple that premise was? Yeah, me too. So, can anyone tell me how the fuck we went from that to this? Like, can someone explain to me how, from such humble beginnings, we got to the middle of a desert with the Death Note possibly strapped to this fucking missile that somehow the Mafia got their hands on and is seconds away from being launched into the fucking stratosphere? Like, imagine introducing someone to Death Note and showing them this shit. Like, this is insane. And yet... Okay, from an analysis standpoint, this shit is silly, but damn it if it's not entertaining. Like, usually when I watch this, I'm very much like Ryuk.
Whoa.
Like, it's so outlandish that you can't help but be enthralled. Like, Oba-sensei deadass channeled his inner gladiator when he wrote this shit.
Are you not entertained?
But yeah, like I said, the Death Note is possibly strapped to this missile. I say possibly because, I mean, it could also be with the dude on the Oh, okay, I guess not. This dude has killed 2 of his men today, and this one was kind of worse because the guy called Rod and asked if this would, like, wipe away his debts, and Rod was like,
yeah, wiped out for sure. Do it.
This guy's a trip, man. Damn. But anyway, with that said, the Death Note is gone, which isn't great, but it's not all bad news, as the chief did end up getting Sayu back. Well, kinda, but we'll talk more about that next time. But yeah, after seeing the 2 of them fly off into the setting sun, we turn our attention back to Light, who's just... defeated. Like, damn. But also, I just find this shot here so funny because Misa wants to bring him something to drink, but she's, like, nervous, which, fair. And while Ryuk doesn't say anything, I'm just imagining him back there whispering, "Do it," just so he can see what Light does next. And Misa does eventually walk over and try to hand it to him, and he He just lazily slaps it out of her hand. And the fact that he did it so slowly and deliberately makes it just all the more disrespectful, in my opinion. But anyway, from there we head back to the SPK. And this is a very interesting scene because, well, shit, to be clear, about half of these people are about to die. And that includes the director of the FBI. And while that is undoubtedly surprising, what's even more surprising is the fact that Nier seems to assume that it's about to happen.
He should be getting his hands on the notebook any moment now. And when he does, I have a good idea of what he'll do next.
Which is, I'm not sure how to feel about that, because on one hand, it seems kind of fucked up to just keep that information to himself. Like, if you have this theory, then maybe you should, like, share that with the class. But then, on the other hand, I mean, what good would it do to tell them about it? Like, oh, by the way, I think the guy who has the notebook is gonna kill some of y'all, so yeah. And I'm not gonna lie, I was kinda gonna go in on him because he's just been talking shit this whole episode, and I found that really weird since he seemed to have some idea that Mello was behind this in the previous episode, given his newfound interest in searching for him. And if he felt like Mello was behind this whole thing, and if he also assumed that Mello might do something like this if he got his hands on the Death Note, then, like, why would you have let someone who you feel is incompetent run the show? But then, when I thought about it, I realized that he had already kind of made it clear what his stance on the entire investigation was.
Of course, saving people's lives is important, but as the SPK, our primary goal is very clear.
So yeah, apparently that applied to his own team as well. Like, obviously he didn't set out to get them killed, he just felt confident enough that even if it was Mello, who, as we established in the previous episode, was someone who more often than not would lose to Nier, he could still get the notebook by letting L number 2 run the show. But as it turns out, he was wrong. And as a result of his cockiness, he, but more so certain members of his team, paid the price. It's actually a little reminiscent of what happened with the original L and the FBI agents that he had sent to Japan. But yeah, this single miscalculation cascaded into a situation where everything just kind of fell apart for him. And I really like the fact that the show made a point to represent that concept via his city of dice crumbling as the members of the SPK died around him. And yeah, all that remain now are Ledner, Rester, Giovanni, and of course, Nier himself. Which, I mean, aside from the director, none of those other people ever even spoke, so yeah. Anyway, Nier then goes on to reach out to L to inform him about what's transpired, and he kinda chastises him for giving up the notebook so easily, saying,
L, you were the one who handed over the notebook without a fight. You and your people were totally helpless.
Which, I mean, that's kind of harsh, seeing as the decision was mostly unilateral. Like, no one could stop the chief because he was the only person who actually had access to the notebook. But in Nier's defense, when Light pushes back and asks him if he could have done any better, Nier responds by saying,
No, considering their preparations, it would have been impossible to avoid this.
So, at the very least, I can appreciate the fact that he acknowledges that the situation was so fucking insane that it was impossible to try and prepare for what Mello and the Mafia had in store for them all. But yeah, from there, Nier goes on to say that the two of them shouldn't fight with each other, but should instead work together to retrieve the notebook from who took it. Nier then goes on to shed some light on who he thinks might be responsible for this situation, as he informs L number 2 of Mello. But interestingly enough, he goes on to say,
I don't have his photograph and I don't know his real name.
And immediately we know that this is a lie, as we saw Nier with a picture of him in the previous episode. So that lets us know that while he does intend on working with L, he still doesn't trust him very much. Which is fair, but also kinda weird that even after this dude killed like half of your team, you're still protecting him. But yeah, in addition to that, he also tells Light that Mello used to live at an orphanage known as the Whammy's House, and thanks to that article from episode 26, Light immediately recognizes it as the orphanage that Watari had founded. Nier then goes on to explain to L that Mello is likely playing a game with him, which fucking hell of a game y'all are playing, guys. But anyway, the scene ultimately ends with him saying,
We want to see which of us will be the first to take down Kira. The final challenge.
And yeah, from there, we actually make our way back to the Shinigami realm. And I know, it's been a minute. The last time we checked in with this realm was back in episode 9, when a few of them were talking about Ryuk and the human who had picked up his notebook. But we're back here again, and it's now that the story introduces one of the most awkward characters in this series, Sido. And yeah, if you're wondering why we're being introduced to yet another Shinigami, well, it's because this particular Shinigami has misplaced his death note. And upon going to the Shinigami King to see where it might be, he's discovered that
Ryuk said it was his and that he had dropped it and took it.
And I'm not gonna lie, Sido is such a funny ass character because why do you sound like such a loser? Maybe it's because he's voiced by Sam Vincent, who, fun fact, also voices Double D from Ed, Edd n Eddy. But like, it's hilarious to me because way back in my video for episode 2, I referred to Ryuk as possibly being a loser. But upon meeting Sido, I realized that Ryuk is just a fucking bully. Because what a dick move to take this guy's notebook. Like, honestly, I just feel bad for him. Because as Arm and Justin...
It's Harmonia, Justin.
Okay, whatever. As Harmonia, Justin tells Sido, he'll have to find Ryuk if he wants his notebook back. And if he wants to speak to Ryuk, then...
I guess I have to go to the human world. Well, that sucks.
And yeah, more on that next time. But for now, roll credits. Anyway, that's the end of this video, but before we wrap this one up, I want to take a second to thank all the folks over on our Patreon who help make these videos possible. Starting things off, I want to say thank you to our 24 admirable assessors. I also want to give a big thanks to all 114 of our invaluable investigators. And in addition to them, I want to shout out our 8 remarkable researchers: Arrow Falcon Green, Game and Alchemist, Pellets, Staff of the Crystal Serpent, The Best, Trinity Schiffer, Tyrant's Link, Vanellian, and Yggdrasil. And last but not least, praise be to our 8 official overanalyzers: Asia, Cavarax XE, Chicken Wugget, Croy Raiden, Amelia, I Am the Blonde Asshole, Joey Helbig, and CMart, who actually did the intro for this episode. I just want to say thanks again to all of y'all for helping make these videos possible. It really does mean a lot. But yeah, if you liked this video, then consider dropping a like. If you really liked it, then consider subscribing. And if you just loved it and want to see more sooner, then consider joining the Patreon. Anyway, that's it for this time. Until next time, friends, peace.